Okay, so today's tutorial is going to be slightly different. I'm going to explain to you how I like to back my finished hoops. So first of all, I turn them over, making sure that the design is where I want it in the hoop, so it's central and the fabric's nice and tight. Then I turn it over and I trim the excess fabric about 1 inch, if I can, away from the edge of the hoop at the back. And I just go all the way around doing that. So then I get a separate hoop I use, or you can do it first. Separate inner hoop, which I place over a piece of felt, and you will get these provided in your kits if you subscribe for kits, and they will be the right size. So you then just need to draw around the inner hoop, and the reason I use the inner hoop and not the outer hoop is because the tighter you can get your felt on the back of your hoop, the nicer it looks. So felt stretches, and if you cut it the size of the inner hoop, which is slightly too small, then as you stitch it, you can stretch it slightly, and you will end up with a nice tight back to your hoop. So I've now got this, and this is going to go on the back here, but before I do anything else, I'm going to gather the thread at the back of the hoop, the fabric even at the back of the hoop. And to do that, I'm just going to prepare a piece of thread, and I'm just going to do about centimetre wide gathering stitches all the way around this excess fabric. And you're going to want to be able to pull this as tight as you can without snapping the thread, because the tighter you can pull it, the easier the next step is to sew the felt on. You can see I'm using quite a long needle, so I can go through a couple of stitches at a time because it makes things a lot quicker. And I'm not pulling it tight as I go because that makes it harder to get to the next bit of fabric that you need to gather through. So I'm grabbing my first end and then my needle end, and I'm just going to knot it once. You can see it's all gathering at the back there, pulling those stitches tight, and then I'm just going to knot it again. And I'm going to come up away from the knot because it will help to pull it tight. Okay, so I've now got my gathered fabric, and the felt is going to go over the top like that, and as I said, I've cut it too small, you can see that, but as we stitch around, you're going to see that the felt will actually stretch into place really quite nicely. So I'm making little stitches from a few millimeters into the felt, through the fabric, coming out as close to the wooden hoop as possible. Sometimes you can actually feel the needle scraping across the hoop, which isn't particularly pleasant, but that is exactly where the needle needs to be coming out to get your felt as tight to the hoop as possible. And coming out close to the hoop will also help to keep the fabric in the hoop tight, because you're essentially stitching it tightly round the inner hoop. And I will show you when I finish going around the edge what you can do to prove to yourself that you have sewn it tight enough around the inner hoop. And if you can do this with your hoops once you've backed them, that means you're backing them right, in my opinion, unless you glue them, which some people do. Trying to keep my stitches as even as possible, but don't worry too much, because if you're using a thread like me that blends in with your felt, then you shouldn't need to worry. Or you could use a contrast thread, and then you would need to keep your stitches really nice and neat, but it could look quite fancy on the back if you did that. So you can see here I'm starting to pull at the felt just to stretch it out a little bit. And I don't normally start stretching the felt till I've gone at least a third of the way round, because if you start stretching before then what you're likely to do is not stretch the centre of the felt, but simply stretch the edge, and that's not actually going to help the felt to be evenly distributed across the hoop. It can get quite tricky when you come to the screws. So just be careful that you don't get your thread caught around them as you're stitching your felt round. So again, I'm just giving the felt a bit of a tug to try and stretch it out. You can also pull with the thread to tighten the felt into the fabric. You want the stitches to be tight, you don't want them to be loose, because you are securing it so that it stays there. If it's done right, then you should never need to reback your hoops or anything like that. I sometimes get questions about washing hoops as well. If the fabric gets dirty, if you use this method, then you can simply take the outer hoop with the metal screw off the hoop, and you can hand wash the fabric with the inner hoop inside, and then so long as you make sure the hoop is thoroughly dried and doesn't sit wet, and you can use a hairdryer to do that, then the bamboo hoop inside won't rust because it hasn't got a screw, and as long as you dry it out, it shouldn't rot or anything like that, so it should be absolutely fine to be washed. So I'm nearly at the end, and you can see I've managed to stretch the felt pretty well around, and it's quite tight as well. And felt will stretch over time anyway. Sometimes if you've backed a hoop a few weeks ago or months ago, and it's been packed with other things, the felt can stretch, and you can always go back around the hoop and just hook the felt in from further into the felt, and tighten it again. So to finish off, I'm just going to stitch a bit further round, so I'm going back through bits that I've already stitched for a few stitches, and then I'm just going to take the needle close to the fabric, into the felt, pull it tight, and then snip the thread end. Just there, no need to knot it or anything, it should be absolutely fine. So if you've backed your hoop right, you should have tight fabric on this side, tight felt on that side, and you should be able, if you loosen it slightly, to pop your design out of the outer hoop, and it should stay secured to your inner hoop, and then you can simply pop it back. So if you decide that you haven't centered placed the screw at the top of your hoop, you can move it, but you can't recenter your design, so you need to make sure that that is already in the center.